Originally produced by our team at Ingenuity Radio in 2002, Searching for the New Liberalism is a 9-part series adapted for this podcast, The Life of a Servant.
Welcome to Part 2. This segment features a presentation by Desiree McGraw.
Desiree McGraw is a Montreal-based consultant in international negotiations and communications who focuses on globalization, environment, and development at Yale University. He also serves as director of the GH research group based here at the Munch Center for International Studies. And I welcome her to the conference. Desiree, you may want to do the podium, I think, about the, I think, a little more effective all around.
Thank you. Most importantly, what was missing from that introduction is what I used to work as one of Sean Acker's research assistants. And there are a number of us here today in this room, and you'll see us throughout the weekend, both serving as presenters, commentators on Hot Affaires. So Tom, the other room, I do want to thank him for this really tremendous opportunity to be here among you and to have the opportunity to speak. To preface my remarks, it's probably worth saying, because I'll be speaking on environment and development, for that I've been following these issues as a researcher and a reporter for over a dozen years now. I attended the Rio Earth Summit as an official member of the Canadian delegation and was appointed by Maurice Strong to serve as one of the key youth ambassadors at the summit. Following the summit, I spent 4 years working as a reporter, covering all the post-Rio negotiations on climate change in different cities. So I come to this issue not just as an academic, but as a former reporter and practitioner. Obviously, there's not enough time to present a full assessment of the Liberal government's performance on environment and sustainable development over the last decade. You will find that in the chapter that I'm contributing to the book that will emerge from this conference. Instead, what I will do is focus my remarks on the single environmental issue and arguably economic issue at the forefront of Canadian mind, and have it support the Kyoto Protocol to the UN framework on climate convention on climate change, with Canada, as you know, signed and ratified in 1992 under the Mulroney Covenant. I will address some of the key queries surrounding the protocol, bring to 14, and this comes on the advice of a former McKinsey consultant, now president and CEO of Volkswagen International, Robert Greenhill, 4 C's. Consultation, credibility, commitment, and consistency not only in our public policy, but in our foreign policy. First, a little bit of background. The UN designated the 1990s as the turnaround decade on sustainable development. Instead, the last decade has been characterized by some as the lost decade on environment and sustainable development. In the decade since the Rio Earth Summit, Canada is widely seen to have gone from environmental leaders to environmental laggards, both at home and abroad. And I say this with disappointment as an active member of the Liberal Party in Quebec, to sort of see various colleagues characterize the more loose government as much better on these issues than, unfortunately, the current government. You will recall that Maurice Strong, a Canadian, served as the chair to both the Stockholm Conference on the Human Environment in 1972 and then to the Rio Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, and that he then became the first executive director of the UN Environment Program. In fact, 2 of the 4 directors of UNEP have been Canadian, and we're fortunate to have with us in the room today one of those executive directors, and that's Elizabeth Dowdeswell, sitting right over there. Ms. Dowdeswell also served, she's graciously agreed to serve as the commentator for this presentation today. Ms. Dowdeswell also served as the chief negotiator on behalf of Canada at the climate change negotiations leading up to the 92 agreement. We also have sort of a bit of a condition of neighbors here, and that is I'll be the bad cop on environmental issues. She may have to be the big cop over in her commentary. So, the news I have to deliver is not necessarily all that positive. It is true that in Rio, Canada had no problem signing into general statements of principle, general framework agreements on biodiversity and climate change, And this actually led David Anderson to characterize Rio as a moderate. And there is some truth to that. But unfortunately, in instructing our negotiators at the Johannesburg summit that took place earlier this month to consistently resist and reject specific targets and timetables, he's essentially relegated the items of the Johannesburg permit to the same ineffectual state, I should say, as many of the Rio outputs. Indeed, many view the World Summit on Sustainable Development as place in Johannesburg is actually a step back from Rio 10 years ago. Australia is one of the leading OECD countries to sign and ratify the original Rio Conventions. We have since dragged our feet on stricter and more substantive sub-agreements, such as the biosafety protocols to regulate the international trade involving GMOs. And of course, as you all know, the sub-agreement, the Climate Change Convention, the Kyoto Protocol to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. At the domestic level, after commissioning an arms-race assessment of Canada's environmental performance since Rio, executive branch or government refused to release the political outcome. Canada's national report to the Johannesburg Summit was released only weeks before the conference started, and 7 months well past the due date set by the United Nations. So clearly, going into Johannesburg, Canada was not going into a position of strength. And so the Prime Minister's announcement or pledge that Parliament would ratify the Kyoto Protocol by the end of the year came as a welcome surprise in many environmental and international circles. The different announcement did serve to bolster support for the protocol by other key countries such as Russia. It was a critical announcement at a critical time, and I want to take nothing away from that announcement. And so as a result of that, Kyoto now stands to become operational and will be binding on all countries that are parties to it. To be operational, the accord required ratification by a minimum of 55 countries, encompassing a minimum of 55% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. And although Kyoto has long surpassed the Mexico criterion in terms of number of parties, it had the second part remained elusive, particularly when George W. Bush of the U.S. would refuse to ratify the agreement. And while the U.S. contributes 25% of the world's greenhouse gases, Canada contributes nearly 2%. So on a person-to-person basis, per capita, it's Canadians, not Americans, who are the biggest energy consumers in the world. And some would argue that's a reflection of our climate and the size of our climate. We're going to need to compensate for that now, not with a more carbon-dependent economy, but by using innovations to move away from unsustainable sources of energy to renewable ones. But Canada's commitment to ratify the Kyoto Protocol did not come with the Prime Minister's pledge at the Johannesburg Summit. The Liberal government initially signaled its intent to ratify Kyoto when it signed the accord in 1997. And as you know, in international law, signature is the first formal step to ratification. So then why, in the 5 years since first signing the accord, has Ottawa failed to produce a viable national action plan to implement the agreement? This failure is not, as some would have it, due to a lack of consultation or technical know-how. Indeed, Canada has some of the brightest minds in the world in both the private and public sectors working on climate change. The failure to craft a clear, comprehensive, and timely implementation program is due purely to a lack of political will. Moving on to consultation. Current complaints regarding the federal government's failure to fully consult with the provinces, key sectors, and stakeholders are disingenuous in light of the real record. Kyoto has arguably been more extensively consulted upon than any other treaty signed by Canada. Imagine, if you will, if the federal government and public Canadians this much on whether majority in international institutions such as NASA or the WTO would meet with the approval of powerful sectors of the Canadian economy. The executive year is not a consultation per se, but for their collective use for purely opportunistic or public relations purposes. Of course, the decisions which were once enacted by elected representatives in our national parliament are increasingly made by non-elected officials at international summits. It is critical that our citizens and our parliamentarians are more involved and informed at all levels and stages of policy-making process. And I think Lloyd Aston's comments in this regard are very interesting. Just looking at some of my own students today, and some of you may find this with the younger generation, they feel that political parties, and it's not parliament, have become irrelevant to politics. And my best and my brightest students, the Commonwealths and the low scholars, are not seeking internships in Parliament. They're organizing demonstrations in the street. So we need to find a way of not just involving our citizens, but the citizen representatives in global decision-making processes. The tackling of democratic deficit and institutional decision-making should not be a discriminatory undertaking, nor should it be used as a berate regarding difficult matters on which the government would rather avoid taking decisive action, which brings us back to Kyoto. Ottawa's mistake lies not in its failure to consult, but rather in its failure to consult on the right question. Until now, consultations have been framed by whether to ratify. Instead, the government should have been asking consulting Canadians directly on how to implement the accord from the very start. This is what Ottawa is now doing, but only after 5 long years of what many regard as vacillation and procrastination. Indeed, despite the initial trade in international environmental circles, the commitment made on the 16th past in Johannesburg, it still lost their cut. Canada's position now appears to be contingent upon 2 additional, and I add improbable conditions. One national, the other international. The national position, at the national level, the national condition is that the is effectively the environmental and economic equivalent of a prairie on Kyoto, a level of detail not required by any other international agreement Canada has signed on to. And at the international level, the condition appears to be credit for clean energy exports. Again, a scheme which has so far failed to secure any substances before during previous rounds of international negotiations. Moving on to the question of credibility. This equivocation seriously undermines our government's credibility on this critical issue both at home and abroad. Far from re-establishing Canada's credentials as an environmental champion in Johannesburg, the confusion following the Prime Minister's announcement may ultimately serve to alienate important stakeholders on all sides of this issue: the international community, the business community, the environmental community, and the provinces. And just briefly, if I may, go through some of their concerns. The international community, especially the European Union, would likely block any additional amendments to the Kyoto Protocol, particularly those proposed by a country which is already widely seen to have watered down the accord. In this light, the position which is held by some fairly prominent political and business leaders that Canada should not ratify Kyoto because it is too feeble proves perverse. If Kyoto is not do enough to curb climate change, it is in part because countries such as Canada have consistently negotiated additional concessions which have served to weaken its assurance. Having successfully softened the accord, Canada walking away from it now would be viewed by the international community as an act of bad faith, and it's not betrayal. Indeed, it would not be very Canadian. So really, from an international perspective, non-ratification is a non-starter. Moving on to concerns by the environmental community. Environmentalists, who strongly, of course, support Kyoto, view the Johannesburg announcement as a last-ditch effort to reverse the country's decade-long slide from environmental leader to laggard. Some perceive what has been dubbed as an outcome lately to force for the accord as an act of ecological opportunism, stemming more from the Prime Minister's preoccupation with his legacy rather than from a real concern for the environment. The business community will resent the allegory we're having now to scramble to meet to targets within a much tighter time frame, Had Canada not only signed but ratified the protocol following the 97 adoption, energy producers and consumers would have had much more time, or we would now have much more time, to transition to a cleaner, less carbon-dependent economy. The provinces. The provinces have described the federal government's breach of public trust in changing the focus of the false consultation across Canada on Kyoto from ratification to implementation. And there is no doubt that if you look at the record, the federal government has in fact circumvented a public consultation process that it had itself laid out. But of course, as I argued, the process was ill-conceived and overextended from the beginning. Consent, though, from the provinces is not required for ratification of international agreements. This authority rests strictly with the federal government. However, given provinces share jurisdiction over natural resources, the federal government does have a responsibility to consult its provincial counterparts on how it arrives at implementing these treaties. Indeed, without securing the full cooperation of the provinces, a number of key instruments may be unavailable for implementation. So really, if one views ratification as a matter of foreign policy to be exercised by the federal government for the common good, and implementation as a matter of domestic, environmental, and economic policy to be jointly agreed by the federal and provincial government, the revised focus of the fall consultations is not only more acceptable, but I would argue it's preferable, notwithstanding the delay. The point is this: by protracting the debate on ratification, we are running out the clock on implementation. And the analogy is this: to Florida fiasco in the U.S. presidential campaign. Not only am I a card-carrying liberal, but I'm a card-carrying U.S. Democrat, and I campaigned for the board team in Michigan. And there were a number of flaws with that whole campaign. But one of them, of course, is that when you recall that Al Gore, after a recount of some of the counties, those which were traditional Democrat strongholds, and in the end, when it became apparent that a recount of all the counties in the state would be required for a topless contest of the results, it was too late. He had run out the clock on himself, and ultimately, one could argue, he cost himself the election. So not only was it wrong as a matter of, from the perspective of the democratic principle, but it was also wrong from the perspective of strategy. Dragging out ratification on Kyoto is not only flawed on moral and diplomatic terms, it is flawed strategically as well. The longer we postpone ratification, the more difficult, if not impossible, it will become to successfully meet our commitments under Kyoto. And failure to implement will effectively become a self-fulfilling prophecy. A question of commitments. Once we ratify Kyoto, of course, it becomes domestic law, and we'll have 6 to 10 more years to reach our target. We don't, unfortunately, as our Prime Minister has contended, have 10 to 12 years to develop the plan. Now, as a liberal from Quebec, it's rare that I agree with a conservative from Alberta, but I do agree with Alberta Environment Minister Lawrence Miller when he says he is right about one thing, that the 2008 to 2012 is the deadline for achieving the plan, not developing it. This reality check leads some who want to give up on Kyoto altogether, but it leads me to the opposite conclusion. We need to expedite ratification as a matter of utmost priority, and then he must consult the stakeholders on how, not whether, to achieve them. Just as the government did with the fiscal deficit, the rationale presented was short-term pay for long-term gain, that it would be unfair to leave the fiscal burden or this debt on future generations. Those arguments could be made, indeed, more strongly in the case of the environmental deficit. For all its imperfections, and I'm wrapping up, the inevitable result, I would argue, is the trade-offs inherent in international negotiations. Kyoto represents the only global game in town in terms of addressing climate change. The near universal support for the protocol, over 170 countries have signed on, have led countries that remain outside the regime to be dubbed environmental rogue states. Concretely, rejecting the Kyoto would also mean that Canada would have little, if any, influence in the upcoming rounds of global climate negotiations, which are expected to bring on developing countries such as India, China, and Brazil. Moreover, ratifying Kyoto did not preclude us from strengthening this global commitment with national and made in Canada or regional and NAFTA-based ones, so long as these ensures rather than eclipse or erase our Kyoto targets. And in conclusion, a matter of the question of consistency, just as there is little doubt that the U.S., even going it alone, would prevail militarily against Iraq, a made in the U.S. alternative to Kyoto would undoubtedly help curb climate change. But that's really not the point. International relations and the rule of law are about means and not just ends. These unilateral actions represent inadequate responses to what are ultimately corrective action problems. But at least the U.S. is very consistent, if not misguided, in its go-it-alone approach to foreign affairs. Will Canada apply its preference for multilateralism to climate change? Canada has expressed strong support for a UN-approved approach to Iraq and its potential use of weapons of mass destruction beyond its own borders. Just as our country has opposed a go-it-alone approach by the United States vis-a-vis Iraq, so too must it reject 50 unilateral approaches to curbing climate change. On both the issues of Iraq and climate change, anything short of a globally sanctioned action would represent diplomatic defeat and, more importantly, suboptimal solutions to what are ultimately global security threats. Thank you.
You have been listening to The Life of a Servant, a Dennis Mills podcast. Visit dennismills.com for more information and archived episodes of this program.